Hey there, everybody. It's Jeff Dowling here with Our Curious World, bringing you stories of the unexplained, the mysterious, and the just plain weird. Today, we're going to look at the question of whether it's really possible to recover a crashed UFO and what would be involved in doing that. This is a companion video to an earlier video I did that looked into the problems involved with reverse engineering a UFO that I thought needed a bit more explanation. Now, the link to that video, by the way, is contained in the description below if you're interested. So let's get into it. So the basic story is that UFOs have crashed on Earth and have been recovered, and that scientists have been secretly studying them for decades and have even been integrating their technology into our own. So before I go on any further, I do want to have a disclaimer here. A lot of these videos sound like I'm skeptical of the idea that there could be UFOs out there. But I want you to understand that nothing could be further from the truth. I do believe extraterrestrial intelligences have been and continue to monitor our planet, and in fact, may be studying us even now. So I'm not at all hostile to the idea that alien craft may have intentionally even landed on Earth. I only question whether any have actually crashed and why such advanced civilizations would be incompetent enough to let us get our hands on their technology if it did. So before we go any further, let's do a little brief history of crash discs. Probably the most famous, of course, is the 1947 Roswell crash, Roswell, New Mexico. This was an event that you've probably heard about. If you haven't, let me just fill you in real quick. There was a farmer, or a rancher actually, named Matt Brazel, who lived near Corona, New Mexico. This is about 90 miles northwest of Roswell, in case you're interested. And he was riding on his ranch one morning in July of 1947. He stumbled across a field of debris that looked like bits and pieces of tinfoil and sticks and ropes, things like that. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Anyway, he eventually told the sheriff about it. The sheriff called Roswell Army Air Force Base. Remember, the Air Force hadn't been officially organized yet, so it's still part of the Army. And they sent one of their intelligence officers, Major Jesse Marcel, to investigate. And he went out and saw this field of debris, reported back that he thought it looked suspicious, and so the Air Force sent out a number of people to collect the debris, and they actually told people to keep their mouth shut about it, not to talk about it. So it looked like there was a cover-up right off the bat. The problem was that the public information officer at the base issued a press release stating that the military had recovered a flying disc near Roswell. Now, the question is, a lot of people think, well, that means they assumed it was alien, but no, not at all. The term, first of all, disc, came from the June 1947 sighting by Kenneth Arnold of a series of discs near Mount Rainier, Washington. In fact, this had only happened a few weeks before this. So the term flying discs or flying saucers had just started to come into the public awareness at the time, which is why this information officer probably used that term. It's also important to remember that the term disc was not necessarily associated with UFOs or alien technology. It was more thought to be potential Soviet technology that had been possibly derived from captured German technology acquired after World War II. So this was the beginning of the Cold War. We were wondering if and when the Russians were going to develop their own atomic bomb. So there was a lot of paranoia about that. So that's where the term disc really came from, and that's how it would have been understood in the context of that time. Eventually, the Air Force backed off on that statement and announced that it was a downed weather balloon. And then the story died. And here, pictures here of Jesse Marcel with debris, and then another one here of General Ramey and Colonel Du Bois with debris. As you look at this, you can see this is bits and pieces of what look like to be tinfoil. In any case, that was enough to kill the story right there, and nobody really thought about it after that until a 1980 book came out called The Roswell Incident by Jesse Marcel, or at least he was interviewed. And he told the story of this crash, and it suddenly came back into our public awareness. And the story just kind of grew from there in leaps and bounds and started to add to it that there were bodies involved with it that had been found, that there had been more than one crash. So some stories have there been 3 crashes in the same area, which is a little hard to understand. In any case, it kind of got out of hand for the most part. Eventually, the Air Force had to explain what it was. In 1994, they declassified what was something called Project Mogul. Mogul was a top secret spy operation that used high altitude balloons to eavesdrop on Soviet nuclear tests. It was part of the U.S. government's efforts to monitor whether Russia had developed its own atomic bomb, which you could detect it from the atmosphere. If it was detonated, you could pick it up on sensors, even halfway around the world. Here's a picture of the Mogul balloon train, what it looks like. It's essentially just a weather balloon with a number of radar reflectors attached to it and some listening devices. It was several hundred feet long, however, and it was supposed to go up into the stratosphere and just sit there for days on end, just listening. The debris found near Roswell then really was wrecked corner reflectors. These are kite-like structures covered with aluminum foil, held together with bamboo sticks. And this is largely what was recovered on the Brazel Ranch. This is what you see in the pictures I showed you earlier. And so that would seem to have killed the idea that this was an extraterrestrial. However, it's taken on a life of its own. It's become something of a cottage industry, especially in Roswell. Here's a picture of the Roswell Alien Museum, or UFO Museum, that's there today. So you can buy t-shirts and mugs and all kinds of stuff with aliens on it. It's kind of a lot of fun. If you ever get down that way, you might want to check it out. But Roswell's not the only story. There's been other people who have come forth over the years, claim that they've seen or been involved in alien craft and body retrievals. Though they haven't really provided any evidence, mostly these are just stories. One of the most sensational claims came from a guy named Bob Lazier, who in 1989 stated that he had worked on one of 9 recovered alien craft at Area 51 up in Nevada. You've probably heard of that. It's pretty famous nowadays. Of course, Bob had some of his education credentials questioned. Apparently a lot of the things he said about where he had gotten his education from turned out to have been fictional, and nothing that he really said could be demonstrated or proven. So he has been largely debunked, although there are still people out there who attest to his story and still believe it. He's not the only one, though. There's in 2023, just a couple of years ago, a former Air Force officer and intelligence official David Grush claimed that the government has highly secretive recovery and reverse engineering programs being done on non-human spacecraft and their dead pilots. He also claims that people have been threatened and killed in order to conceal these programs. Now, he doesn't maintain that he actually witnessed any of these things personally, that he actually saw these craft or these bodies. He just had been told by others that he apparently trusted that these were facts. So he's never produced any evidence and hasn't been unwilling to go into detail about these programs or talk about who told him these things. So he's sort of a whistleblower that wants to maintain a lot of the secrets. So there's really nothing you can do with his story other than just look at it as an interesting story and move on. So such stories are interesting and they need to be investigated when you hear one. To date, there is no evidence any of them have validity. They're often only considered reliable because of the credentials of the witnesses. So, for example, if I told you that I had been involved in recovering an alien disc, you probably wouldn't believe me for good reason, because I don't have any credentials or reason that you should believe me. But if I were, say, a retired CIA agent, or I was, say, a retired senior military officer that had access to top secrets, and I told you about this, and you'd be more likely to believe me. So that's the problem when you're just working with degrees of credibility, is that we often put a lot of faith in the people who are telling us these stories just because of who they are. And while that's to be taken into consideration, it's not evidence that their stories are any more valid than anyone else's. But why would people make up stories like that? Well, a lot of times you can have, people want to find fame. They want to be known for something. Maybe their lives are not that interesting and they just have fun doing these things. I have met people in the paranormal community who have admitted to me that they have made stuff up just because they had a willing audience and they enjoy doing it. They get a kick out of it. I'm not saying that was the case with these individuals, but I'm just saying that there are people out there who will do this. There's also the true believers out there. They believe whatever they're told. A lot of times when you look at these stories and you ask the person who told you about this particular incident, they will point to some story they heard from somebody who heard it from somebody else. And usually in the end, you can't really figure out who originated the story. It just kind of takes on a life of its own, and it becomes part of the local folklore. And when you try to check out these sources, often you end up with dead ends. So a lot of it's just believing it because you want it to be true. And then, of course, there is such a thing as hallucinations and delusions. People see things, they misidentify it. A good example is the Roswell crash. This was a top secret government program, which is why they were being threatened with harm if they spoke about it. But it wasn't about hiding UFOs. It was about covering up a top secret government program to spy on the Soviets. And people saw this tinfoil, this aluminum foil out there, and not being familiar with what it was or what it does, they just jumped to conclusions. So that's not to say that there's not some really intriguing evidence out there people have talked about over the years, but until something more substantial turns up, we just have to take this as stories and move on. But let's get into the meat of the matter. What would cause a UFO to crash on our planet? A couple of things to think about. These are pieces of technology that are centuries, maybe thousands of years ahead of our own. Certainly if they can fly through the vast expanse of space, coming hundreds or thousands of light years, they have to have tremendous amounts of advanced technology in them. So why would they just kind of fall out of the sky once they get here? It had to be something really remarkable would have to happen to them. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that one of them did have some kind of a mechanical malfunction and it set down on Earth, came on down. The first question I have is, wouldn't the other aliens that are watching us take note of this and make some effort to recover it? These are the craft that are reported to have crashed are generally pretty small, 20, 30 feet in diameter. It's unlikely that they could come all these distances by themselves being that small. You'd almost think it'd have some kind of a mothership or something that would be able to transverse the great distances of space and then launch them over our planet. And if one of them went down, you would think that they would make some effort to recover it. I mean, that's what we would do whenever we would lose a piece of high-tech equipment, or even a fairly advanced military equipment goes down some remote place. We do make an effort to retrieve it if we can. And I suspect aliens would do the same thing. It's also possible that an alien spacecraft would have a self-destruct mechanism, specifically to keep it from falling into the hands of primitives like us. So you would think that if they couldn't recover it for whatever reason, that they could just basically destroy it, just have it disintegrate into dust and leave nothing left of it. That's another possibility. But when you look at how aircraft crash, they generally crash in one of three ways. Most common, or the worst, obviously, is with a hard crash. It goes in at a steep angle. It leaves a big smoking crater, like in this picture here. You can see just bits and pieces of the airplane are left. And this is probably what happens most commonly. So if a UFO did go down, it went in straight in like that, it probably wouldn't leave much to recover. Just a big smoking crater and probably a mound of molten slag at the bottom of it that wouldn't be very useful in terms of determining any kind of things about it. But not all planes that crash hard like that necessarily explode. Here's a fairly famous picture of the airplane that Buddy Holly died in 1959, him and the Big Bopper Richard Valens. And you can see the plane didn't have to hit the ground all that hard either. It only hit about maybe 100 miles an hour into the ground, and it didn't explode. It just crumbled into this ball, and that's all that was left of it. Again, trying to determine anything from this kind of wreckage would be very difficult. There's nothing left really to work with. Sometimes planes, of course, don't crash head on. They break up in the sky. Sometimes the G-forces become too much and it rips the wings and the tail off and it just comes apart. Sometimes if a bomb is involved on board, the plane will disintegrate that way. When that happens, of course, then you have a debris field, which would be very difficult to recover all the pieces from, and then much less make sense of it when you put it all together. I suppose it's possible, but it would be very difficult. The third type, and the type that we would be most interested in, would be a crash landing, where the craft comes down largely intact. You can see in this picture of this airplane that did a hard landing and caught fire. Just a lot of it's still intact. There's enough left there that you could figure out quite a bit about this airplane if you were going to try to reverse engineer it. So that's what we're looking for with a downed alien craft. But let's say that one did go down and it was fairly intact. The big problem, of course, is where did it go down? I mean, the Earth is covered 2/3 with water, and then there's Antarctica, there's the Arctic, Siberia, northern Canada, the Amazon rainforest, the jungles of Africa, the deserts of Africa and Australia. I mean, if this thing goes down anywhere in those areas, we're unlikely to know about it or much less recover it, especially if it landed in the oceans. It would be almost impossible to find it and recover it. So it has to come down someplace that's fairly accessible, and, at least on dry land, somewhere hopefully close to a road system where people can come out and find the thing. But here's the problem. So let's say that one does come down, and it comes down in a place that's fairly accessible. There's people around here that notice it. Someone has to stumble across this thing, first of all, and find it. Then they would call the local authorities, the police. The police would come out and investigate, and then they would figure out we've got something really unusual here. At some point, they would contact probably the military. And then the military has to go through the chain of command to figure out what they're going to do about it. They would eventually send someone out to take a look themselves. And if they determined that this was something significant, like a crashed alien disc, they would then have to cordon off the area. They'd bring in a bunch of security people. The problem is, by that time, this could be days after the crash. How many people have come by to take a look? How many civilians? Maybe you have the media come over the helicopter to get footage of it? So already the secrecy has been compromised pretty severely. This might not have been a big issue in 1947, but it would be almost impossible today to keep this secret. So once you did manage to cordon off the area, then you'd have to bring in equipment to remove this thing, try to take it to a secure location somewhere. You have to figure out how you're going to transport it. It would just be a real circus to try to get this thing out of there. Then I also want to bring up the question about what about the bodies, alien remains? If you found a dead alien or even a live alien, it's kind of hard to believe that people have made those claims. Remember the movie War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells' classic? It was made back in the 50s. They also did a remake early in the 21st century. What killed the Martians on these ships was our own germs. Once the Martians got a whiff of earthly atmosphere, the bacterias, biological agents, microorganisms got into their system and killed them. You would think that they would have figured that out before they tried to invade Earth, which is a little plot hole, but let's say they didn't figure that out, and that's what killed them. Well, wouldn't the same thing be true for us if we came upon a dead alien? Might they have alien microbes, bacteria, microorganisms in their system that we would inhale or come in contact with? Might well mutate. Something like that could kill everybody. I mean, it might be benign and only give you nothing more than a cold, or it could kill you in a couple hours. You don't really know what an alien life form or alien bacteria would do to us. Certainly, it wouldn't be probably very helpful. If you want an example from history, just look at what happened to the indigenous population of North America when whites got here. The Indians couldn't handle the smallpox and influenza and the other diseases that we had built a resistance to, and millions of them died. This would be the same thing that would happen with these alien microbes, and it would be probably on a global scale. This was, remember, when this happened in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, America was still pretty remote. You couldn't really spread it very far. But today we're a global community, so any kind of an alien microbe that got into our system would be transported pretty quickly, the same way COVID was, except it might be much more dangerous and lethal than COVID. And COVID was bad enough. Can you imagine if it was an alien microbe that we had no defenses against? It would be amazing how quickly it could wipe out life on Earth. So I would think if you came across a body, the last thing you'd want to do is touch it. I mean, this thing is a biohazard of the first order, and we don't even know how it works, so we couldn't even counter it if we had an issue with it. So the first thing I would do is do not touch the bodies. Leave them alone, bury them, burn them, do whatever you need to do, but don't drag them off to some secure location and try to study them, because the chances are you'll be dead. And if you don't believe science takes that seriously, remember when the first Apollo moon missions got back to Earth, they quarantined the astronauts for 21 days, just in case they had picked up some kind of a lunar bug of some kind that was unknown. I mean, even back then, scientists were very concerned about this kind of stuff, and so they took it seriously. So attempting to recover an alien body would be extremely dangerous. And then you have to think about how many people would be involved in this recovery and subsequent study of the bodies or the craft. I mean, you would have the military who would provide security. They would probably transport the device or the bodies. Then you'd have to bring in scientists, not just from your own country, but probably from around the world. You also have to think in terms of what country does this thing come down in? And a lot of countries would not let us even go in there to recover it. I mean, if it crashed in Russia, I don't think the Russians are going to let us recover it. They're going to recover it themselves. In any case, it would just be so many people involved, hundreds, possibly thousands over the course of decades. And yet none of them to date have come forward to say, yeah, I was part of that cover-up and here's evidence of it. So it just seems a little bit inconceivable. If you'd like to know more about this whole subject, I actually have written a book a number of years ago called UFOs, The Great Debate. And I talk about reverse engineering and recovering aliens and things of this nature in some detail. And if you're interested, that book is down in the, it's still available on Amazon. It's out of print now, but you can still get used copies of it online. And so there's a link below to it in the description if you're interested in the book. It's called UFOs, The Great Debate. So in conclusion, stories of crashed discs and recovered bodies are anecdotal, and there's no hard evidence that either have ever been found. Does that mean there's a massive government cover-up? I don't know. Do you think your government is competent enough to do this? Or any government is, really? And I doubt it. We can't keep secrets very well. Remember when the Manhattan Project was first implemented in World War II, it was one of the most secretive projects in American history. And even then, the Germans still knew about it. They didn't know exactly what we were doing, but they had a pretty good idea we were up to something. So even something with that much security could not be kept a complete secret. And it only lasted a short time as it was. Once the atomic bombs were detonated, then there was no reason to keep it a secret. So it sounds like stories of recovered UFOs are just what they appear to be, stories. So until someone can produce hard evidence, such as a piece of debris or clear unaltered photos of flying saucers in a hangar somewhere, they're going to have to remain in the realm of speculation. The problem with that is that when the UFO community obsesses about the more spectacular and incredible parts of the UFO phenomena, it takes away from its overall credibility. This is unfortunate, as UFOs, or AUPs as they're known today, deserve serious study. And things like crashed discs and alien bodies being hidden in some secret lab somewhere reduces the chances of the mystery ever being taken seriously. I would love it if we could actually recover a crash UFO, but I doubt it will ever likely to happen. But one can always hope. Until then, however, we need to concentrate on what we do have in terms of videos and physical evidence and eyewitness accounts by reliable witnesses, and go from there. So if you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below, and to see more stories like this from our curious world. Until next time, just remember this: you are entirely unique, just like everybody else. So until next time, Jeff Daly signing off. Bye.